The first time my grandson refused to call me Grandpa, I was standing beside a pile of branches at his school. I had arrived 20 minutes early for the family day because I wanted to surprise him. Ethan was 11, and I hadn't seen him in almost a month. I wasn't dressed for a special occasion. I wore an old blue jacket, faded jeans, and the work boots I'd owned for years. As I stood near the school garden, a woman carrying a clipboard hurried toward me. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you with maintenance?" I looked behind me. No. She glanced at my clothes, then pointed toward a pile of branches near the fence. "Could you move those before the children come outside? Someone could trip over them." I almost smiled. "Sure." I moved the branches without arguing. She thanked me quickly and walked away. A few minutes later, I heard children laughing near the playground. Then I saw Ethan. He was standing with 3 boys from his class, wearing a white school shirt and holding a paper airplane. My face immediately lit up. "Ethan." He turned. For a second, he looked happy to see me. Then he noticed his friends watching. I walked over. "Hey, buddy." He didn't answer. I smiled and put my hand on his shoulder. "It's good to see you." One of the boys looked at me. "Who's that?" I answered before Ethan could. "I'm his grandfather." Ethan suddenly pulled away from my hand. "No, he's not." I stared at him. "What?" He looked at his friends. Then at me. "Don't call yourself my grandpa." The laughter around us stopped. I could feel my face getting hot, but I kept my voice calm. "Ethan, it's me. I know who you are." "Then why did you say that?" He lowered his voice. "Because I don't want them thinking you're my grandpa." One of the boys looked confused. "But he looks old enough to be." Ethan shook his head. "My real grandpa is different." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I understood. His teacher approached us a moment later. "Is everything all right?" Ethan immediately stepped away from me. "He's just one of the volunteers." I looked at him. A volunteer. Not his grandfather. Not even someone he knew. Just a volunteer. I forced a smile. "That's right." His teacher smiled politely. "Thank you for helping with the garden." I nodded. Then I walked away. I found an empty bench behind the gym and sat down. I told myself not to take it personally. He was 11. Children said things they didn't understand. But I knew that wasn't the whole story. Someone had taught him to be ashamed of me. About 20 minutes later, my son Michael arrived with his wife, Sarah. Michael spotted me immediately. "Dad." "Michael." He looked toward Ethan. Then back at me. "You shouldn't have come." I frowned. "This is a family day." "I know." "Then why shouldn't I be here?" He sighed. "Because you make things uncomfortable." Sarah stepped closer. "Henry, Ethan is at a sensitive age. He's starting to care about how his friends see him." I looked at her. "So he's embarrassed by me?" She didn't answer directly. "Maybe you should think about how you present yourself." I looked down at my jacket. "This. You know what I mean." Michael rubbed his forehead. "Dad, just go home. Don't turn this into a scene." "I haven't made a scene." "You don't have to." For a moment, I wanted to ask him what had happened to the little boy who used to run toward me whenever I came home from work. Instead, I simply nodded. "Fine." I walked toward the parking lot. As I passed a group of parents, I heard Sarah talking to another woman. I wasn't trying to listen. Then I heard my name. Henry never really accomplished much, Sarah said. I stopped. The other woman asked something. Sarah laughed quietly. He had some little business years ago. Michael had to build his whole life without much help from him. I stood there for a second. Then I kept walking. That evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table. I kept thinking about Ethan's face when he said he didn't want anyone knowing I was his grandfather. I wasn't angry with him. Not really. He was repeating something he'd heard at home. That was what hurt. I opened an old drawer and found a photograph of Michael when he was 8 years old. He was sitting on my shoulders, laughing. I remembered that day. I remembered almost everything. Then I opened another drawer. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in years. The documents inside had nothing to do with the man my son described to other people. I closed the folder again. There was no reason to explain myself. Not yet. If my family wanted to believe I was a failure, I would let them. But the next morning, I made one decision. I was going back to that school. Not to confront my son. Not to embarrass Ethan. And not to prove anything to anyone. I was going back because there was something about that school my family knew nothing about. Something I had been quietly involved with for years. And soon, Ethan was going to discover it too. The next morning, I drove back to Ethan's school. I didn't tell Michael. I didn't tell Sarah. And I certainly didn't tell Ethan. I parked across the street and sat in my car for a few minutes, watching parents drop their children off. I kept thinking about what had happened the day before. I could have confronted my son. I could have told him exactly how wrong he was about me. But I decided against it. There was no point. People who judge you by your clothes rarely believe you when you tell them what's underneath them. So I walked through the school gates and headed toward the office. The same teacher who had mistaken me for a maintenance worker the previous day was standing behind the reception desk. She recognized me. "Oh, hello. Good morning." She smiled awkwardly. "I'm sorry about yesterday. There's nothing to apologize for. I honestly thought you worked here." "I understand." She hesitated. "Are you Ethan's grandfather?" I nodded. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "I didn't realize." Neither did he. She looked uncomfortable. Before she could respond, the principal came out of her office. Her name was Mrs. Carter. She was a woman in her 50s who always seemed to be carrying 3 problems at once. "Mr. Wilson," she said, "I know you." That surprised me. "You do." She smiled. "Not personally. But I've heard your name." I didn't ask why. Instead, I looked around the hallway. The school was older than I remembered. Some of the lockers were dented. Several ceiling lights were flickering. Through an open classroom door, I could see computers that looked like they belonged in a museum. Mrs. Carter noticed me looking. "We're doing our best. I can see that." She sighed. "Funding has been difficult. What would you need if money wasn't the problem?" She laughed. "That's a dangerous question." "I'm serious." She studied me for a moment. Then she began telling me. The school needed new computers. The library hadn't received new books in years. The science department had almost no modern equipment. And there was a small tutoring program that had recently been cut because the school couldn't afford to keep paying the instructors. I listened without interrupting. Then I asked one question. "Which one matters most?" "The tutoring program." "Why?" "Because some of these children don't have anyone helping them at home." I nodded. "I understand." She didn't know it yet, but I had already made my decision. That afternoon, I called my attorney. Do you remember the educational trust we discussed? Of course. I want to activate it. There was a pause. How much? Enough to restore the tutoring program for 3 years. Do you want your name attached to it? No. Henry, you could receive a substantial tax benefit if... I don't care about the tax benefit. He laughed quietly. I knew you'd say that. I gave him the details. By the end of the week, the school received a letter from a private foundation offering to fund the entire tutoring program. There was no photograph, no ceremony, no plaque. Only one condition. The donor wanted to remain anonymous. Mrs. Carter called me. We received the funding. I heard. Do you know who the donor is? No. She laughed. You don't sound very curious. I suppose I'm not. The program reopened 2 weeks later. I began volunteering there. Not as a donor. Not as someone important. Just as an old man who knew how to fix computers and explain difficult things patiently. The first afternoon, 6 children showed up. Ethan was one of them. He didn't recognize me at first. He walked into the classroom, saw me sitting beside a stack of old laptops, and stopped. You. I smiled. Me. He looked around. Do you work here? No. Then why are you here? I volunteer. He seemed surprised. One of the other boys pulled out a chair. Come on, Ethan. Ethan sat down. For the next hour, I helped them with a small engineering project. The children had to build a bridge using wooden sticks. Ethan's first attempt collapsed. He frowned. I can't do it. You can. No, I can't. I moved the pieces toward him. Then try something different. He looked at me. How do you know? Because I've made plenty of mistakes. He smiled slightly. Really? More than you can imagine. That was the first real conversation we'd had since the school event. By the end of the afternoon, Ethan's bridge stood on its own. He looked proud. I was proud too. But I didn't tell him. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular volunteer. I fixed broken computers. I helped children with mathematics. I brought books for the library. And whenever someone asked where the money for the new equipment came from, I simply said, someone who cares. Nobody suspected me. Not even Ethan. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter showed me a new computer room. We wouldn't have been able to do this without the foundation. I looked through the glass at the children working inside. Then make sure they use it. We will. She paused. Whoever this donor is, they must really care about this place. I smiled. Some people don't need to be thanked. She looked at me strangely. I changed the subject. But something was beginning to change. Ethan started looking for me when he arrived at school. He began asking questions. Where had I learned engineering? Why did I know so much about computers? Why did I volunteer every afternoon? I never gave him the full answer. Not yet. Then, one Friday, I saw Michael waiting outside the school. He was standing beside his car, watching Ethan leave. When he noticed me, his expression immediately hardened. He walked toward me. What are you doing here so often? Volunteering. Why? Because they need help. He shook his head. You don't need to play hero. I looked at him calmly. I'm not playing anything. Michael stepped closer. Stay away from Ethan. I felt my chest tighten. He's my grandson. You heard what he said. I did. I remembered every word. Michael turned and walked away. I watched him go. Then I looked through the classroom window. Ethan was sitting at a computer I had helped pay for. He was smiling. And for the first time, I wondered how long I could keep the truth from him. Because there was something else my son didn't know. The foundation hadn't just paid for the computers. It had just approved its largest project yet. And this time, it was going to change Ethan's life. The following Monday, Mrs. Carter asked me to come to her office. She closed the door behind me. "Henry, I need to talk to you about Ethan." My heart tightened. "Is he all right?" "He's fine. Actually, he's doing better than fine." She smiled. "He hasn't missed a single tutoring session since you started volunteering." I smiled too. "That's good. He talks about you." I looked at her. "What does he say?" "That you're the only person who doesn't get frustrated when he makes mistakes." For some reason, that hurt more than anything Michael had said. I had spent years wanting to be part of my grandson's life. Now, without even knowing who I was, he was finally letting me in. Mrs. Carter sat down. "There's something else." She handed me a folder. "Our foundation funding has allowed us to expand the program. But there's a child in the program who needs more than tutoring." I opened the folder. Ethan's name was on the first page. My hands went still. Mrs. Carter quickly explained. Ethan had been having health problems for several months. His parents had been taking him to different doctors, but the treatment he needed was expensive. "The school counselor mentioned that his family is struggling with the medical bills," she said. I looked at the papers again. "How much?" She told me. It was more than I expected. But money wasn't the problem. The problem was that this was my grandson. I called my attorney that evening. "I need the medical expenses covered." He was silent for a moment. "Henry, are you sure?" "Yes." "Do you want Michael to know?" "No." "Then we'll arrange it through the trust." The paperwork was completed within days. The hospital received payment from the same educational foundation. Michael and Sarah were told that an anonymous charitable organization had covered the remaining cost. I never told them otherwise. A week later, Ethan returned to school. He looked thinner. But he was smiling. When he saw me, he ran toward me. He stopped just before reaching me. Then he hesitated. "Mr. Wilson?" I smiled. "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" He shrugged. "For helping me." I knew exactly what he meant. But I pretended I didn't. "You're welcome." He looked at me for a few seconds. Then he asked the question I had been expecting. "Did you know I was sick?" I nodded. "Yes." "How?" "I know people." He frowned. "Are you rich?" I almost laughed. "Why would you ask that?" "Mom says rich people don't dress like you." That sentence told me more than he realized. I sat down beside him. "Your mother has her opinions." "Are you?" "Am I what?" "Rich." I looked at him. "I have enough." He seemed disappointed. "How much is enough?" "Enough to help someone when they need it." He thought about that. Then he smiled. I didn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Meanwhile, the school continued to change. New computers arrived. The library received hundreds of books. The tutoring program expanded. Mrs. Carter wanted to put the foundation's name on a large plaque near the entrance. I refused. "No plaque." "Why?" "Because the children don't need to know who paid for the chairs they're sitting on." She smiled. You really want to stay anonymous? Yes. But there was another reason. I wanted Ethan to learn something. I wanted him to understand that helping people didn't require applause. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated what was happening. One afternoon, Michael showed up at the school again. He found me in the computer room. What is all this? I looked around. Computers. I can see that. He pointed toward the equipment. Who paid for it? A foundation. Which one? An anonymous one. He stared at me. You expect me to believe that? I shrugged. I don't really care what you believe. His face hardened. You've always been like this. Like what? Acting mysterious. Pretending you're better than everyone. I slowly closed the laptop in front of me. I've never claimed to be better than anyone. Then stop interfering with my family. I looked at him. I'm helping your son. You don't get to buy your way back into his life. That sentence stayed with me. Because Michael didn't know the truth. I hadn't bought anything. I hadn't asked Ethan to love me. I hadn't even told him I was his grandfather. I had simply helped him because he was my grandson. Michael walked away. I watched him disappear through the hallway. That evening, I sat in my car outside the school. For the first time, I wondered whether keeping the secret was actually helping anyone. Then my phone rang. It was my attorney. Henry, there's something you need to know. What? The hospital sent us an additional report regarding Ethan. I gripped the steering wheel. What kind of report? The treatment was more complicated than they originally expected. I closed my eyes. Is he going to be all right? Yes. The doctors are optimistic. I exhaled. Then my attorney added something I wasn't expecting. There's another issue. The school wants to announce the donor behind the educational foundation. I stared through the windshield. Why? They're planning a major ceremony. The foundation has funded too much for them to keep calling it anonymous. I understood immediately. If they revealed my name, Michael would find out. Sarah would find out. And Ethan would finally know that the man he had been taught to be ashamed of had been behind almost everything. I had spent weeks trying to earn my grandson's trust without using my money. Now the truth was coming whether I wanted it or not. And I wasn't sure what would hurt more. Ethan discovering who I really was. Or discovering why his parents had lied about me. The ceremony was scheduled for Friday evening. The school called it a celebration of the new educational program. I knew better. It was going to be the day everyone learned who had been paying the bills. For 3 days, I considered asking my attorney to stop it. In the end, I didn't. Maybe the time had come. Friday evening, the school auditorium was packed. Parents filled the first rows. Teachers stood along the walls. Children sat together near the stage. I took a seat near the back. I didn't want anyone making a fuss over me. Michael and Sarah arrived a few minutes later. They sat near the front. Neither of them noticed me. Ethan did. He turned around and saw me. His face immediately brightened. He waved. I waved back. It was a small thing, but it meant more to me than he could possibly understand. A few minutes later, Mrs. Carter walked onto the stage. She thanked the teachers, the parents, and everyone who had supported the school. Then she stopped. There is one person we have not been able to thank publicly. The room became quiet. For the past year, an anonymous donor has funded our tutoring program, our new computer laboratory, our library expansion, and several scholarships. People began whispering. Mrs. Carter smiled. We have respected this person's wish for privacy. She paused. But tonight, we have been given permission to reveal their name. I felt my hands tighten around the arms of my chair. Ethan was watching the stage. Michael was watching too. Mrs. Carter looked at the audience. The person behind the Wilson Educational Trust is... She said my name. Henry Wilson. For a second, nobody moved. Then I heard someone whisper, Henry. Michael turned around. His eyes found me. His face went completely pale. Sarah stared at me as if she had never seen me before. Ethan was the only person who didn't look angry. He looked confused. Then he slowly stood up. That's you. I nodded. He walked toward me. You did all of this? I helped. He shook his head. The computers? Yes. The books? Yes. The tutoring program? I smiled. Yes. He stared at me. Then his voice became quieter. My hospital bills? The entire room seemed to disappear. I looked at him. Yes. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. You paid for that? I nodded. I wasn't going to let money decide whether you got better. He looked down, then back at me. But why? I didn't need to ask what he meant. Why would I help someone who had refused to call me Grandpa? I took a breath. Because you're my grandson. He covered his mouth. Behind him, I heard Sarah begin to cry. Michael stood frozen. I expected him to say something. He didn't. Mrs. Carter returned to the microphone. There is something else you should know. She held up a folder. Mr. Wilson has funded Ethan's educational scholarship through high school and has established a separate scholarship program for other students who need assistance. A murmur moved through the auditorium. I stood up. I didn't want applause. I didn't want anyone calling me generous. I simply wanted the truth to be understood. I didn't do these things to prove that I wasn't a failure, I said. The room became silent. I did them because children shouldn't have to pay for the circumstances they were born into. I looked at Ethan. And because sometimes people are judged before anyone takes the time to know them. My eyes moved toward Michael and Sarah. I know what you told him about me. Michael looked down. I know you wanted him to believe I was someone who never accomplished anything. I paused. But I never wanted him to love me because of money. Ethan wiped his eyes. I thought you were ashamed of me, he whispered. My heart broke. Never. He took another step toward me. I was ashamed of you. I swallowed. I know. I'm sorry. I nodded. I know you're sorry. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for since the day at the school garden. Can I call you Grandpa now? I couldn't answer immediately. My throat had tightened. Finally, I smiled. You can call me whatever you want. He ran toward me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I held him tightly. For the first time in months, I didn't care who was watching. Then I heard footsteps behind us. Michael. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes were red. Dad. I looked at him. He seemed smaller somehow. Not physically. Just like the confident man who had told me to stay away from his family had finally disappeared. I was wrong, he said. I didn't respond. I should never have said those things. I looked at Ethan, still holding on to me, then back at my son. You're right, I said quietly. Michael nodded. But I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. That surprised me. He continued. I know I have a lot to make up for. I looked at him for a long moment. Yes, you do. He nodded again. Then he said something I never thought I'd hear. I want Ethan to know his grandfather. I looked at my grandson. He was smiling through his tears. And for the first time since that terrible afternoon, I felt like I had finally gotten something back. Not my money. Not my reputation. Something much more important. My family. The following Monday, I arrived at school earlier than usual. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. I walked through the front entrance in the same old blue jacket I'd worn on Family Day. The receptionist smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." "Good morning." Then I heard footsteps behind me. "Grandpa." I turned around. Ethan was running toward me. He stopped just before crashing into me, then threw his arms around my waist. I laughed. "Careful. Sorry. You've got a lot of energy this morning." He looked up at me. "I have something for you." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack. I opened it. It was a drawing. It showed two people standing beside a school. One was a little boy. The other was an older man. Above them, Ethan had written, "My grandpa and me." I stared at it longer than I should have. "Do you like it?" "It's perfect." He smiled. "I thought you might keep it." "I will." I folded it carefully and put it inside my jacket. Then Ethan asked something I hadn't expected. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" I thought about the question. "Because I wanted you to know me before you knew my money." He nodded slowly. "Did you hate me when I said I didn't want you to be my grandpa?" "No. Not even a little." I smiled. It hurt. His expression fell. "But I knew you were repeating something you'd been told." He looked down. "I shouldn't have said it." "No. I was scared my friends would laugh at me." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That's why you should always be careful about deciding someone's worth based on what other people think." He nodded. "I understand." We walked toward his classroom together. For the next few months, things changed slowly. Not perfectly. Slowly. Michael began visiting me more often. At first, our conversations were uncomfortable. He didn't know how to talk to me anymore. I didn't know how much I could trust him. But he kept showing up. That mattered. One evening, he sat across from me at my kitchen table. "I spent years thinking you didn't do enough for our family." I said nothing. He continued. "I thought because you lived simply, you must have failed." I looked at him. "You confused money with success." He nodded. "I did." Then he looked down. "I also taught Ethan to think the same way." "Yes. I'm sorry." This time, I believed him. Not because he said it once. Because he kept proving it afterward. Sarah apologized too. It took longer with her. She had been the one who constantly told Ethan that appearances mattered. But eventually, even she admitted that she had been wrong. I didn't expect everything to return to the way it had been before. Some things couldn't. Trust doesn't come back because someone says, "I'm sorry." It comes back through hundreds of small decisions. Michael learned that. So did I. And Ethan? He never called me anything but Grandpa again. At school, things changed too. The tutoring program became one of the most successful programs in the district. The computer laboratory expanded. More children received scholarships. And eventually, Mrs. Carter asked me to speak to the students. I stood in front of several hundred children. I looked at their faces and thought about the little boy who had once been afraid his friends would laugh because of an old man's jacket. I told them something I wished someone had told my own son years earlier. Never decide what a person is worth by what they own. The children were quiet. Some of the most valuable people you'll ever meet won't look important. I looked toward the back of the room. Ethan was sitting there. He smiled. After the speech, he came running toward me. "Grandpa!" I opened my arms. He hugged me. And this time, there was no hesitation. No embarrassment. No looking around to see who was watching. Just a boy hugging the man he finally understood. Later that afternoon, I walked past the garden where everything had started. The branches were gone. The flowers had grown back. I stood there for a moment, remembering the woman who had mistaken me for a maintenance worker. I smiled. Maybe she hadn't been completely wrong. I had spent most of my life fixing things. Machines. Businesses. Broken equipment. But the most important thing I ever helped repair wasn't any of those. It was my relationship with my grandson. I used to think my greatest achievement was the company I built. I don't think that anymore. Money can disappear. Businesses can close. People can forget your name. But when an 11-year-old boy runs across a schoolyard and calls you grandpa like he's proud of the word, you realize you've been given something no bank account can buy. I never needed Ethan to know how much money I had. I only needed him to know how much I loved him. And in the end, that was the one thing nobody could take away from us.